Good evening and welcome back to Quorum on MPB. I'm Ron Brown. The Mississippi State Legislature appears just a couple of days away from wrapping up the 2010 regular session. But first, they'll have to take care of the biggest and perhaps the most difficult task on their to-do list. That is writing and approving a budget for fiscal year 2011. House and Senate lawmakers returned Tuesday from a 3.5-week break. They're pledging to work as quickly as possible to tie up the loose ends of their session work. Those loose ends include appointment confirmations and several pieces of local and private legislation. But the budget dominates much of their agenda, of course. The legislature moved quickly Tuesday to clear several appropriations stemming from special funds, but the contentious work of approving general fund appropriations began today. That budgeting includes K-12 and higher education, public health, and Medicaid. They are among the most expensive programs and services in Mississippi's annual budget, and they tend to be the most divisive, too. But this week's work at the Capitol follows Governor Haley Barbour's latest executive budget recommendation for 2011. The governor unveiled it last Wednesday after the revenue estimating group revised its own forecasts for the year ahead. Barbour says cuts between 12 and 17% are needed for most state agencies and programs compared to their 2011 appropriations. He recommends an 11% cut for K-12 funding, a 12.1% cut for higher education, and 12.4% for public health. But the governor calls for a 10% increase for Medicaid funding. That's to help cover thousands more Mississippians who will need that assistance in these rough economic times. His recommendation calls for total state support of about $5.1 billion, and it uses about $383 million in stimulus funding from the 2009 American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA. That means that Barbour wants to spend 8% less than was originally appropriated for the 2010 budget. And the governor warns that stimulus money will not be around for the 2012 budget.
Between 10, the fiscal year we're in today, and fiscal year 12, which is just one fiscal year after this budget, we will lose $570 million of federal stimulus money on an annualized basis. We'll be getting $570 million less from the federal government under the stimulus package in FY12 that we're getting this fiscal year. I make that point just to say this is a tight budget. It makes significant cuts. It can't be executed with business as usual, and the next year is going to be tougher.
Now, of course, lawmakers are making their own decisions about how much to appropriate to each program. They traditionally ignore the governor's proposal. But House and Senate negotiators agreed early on to appropriate a little less than $5.5 billion for 2011. So across the board, state government will feel the budget pinch. We asked several lawmakers for their opinions on the budget, including the powerful Senate Appropriations Chairman, Alan Nunnally.
It's not a pretty budget. It's not a budget that I'm proud of, but I'm very proud that we reached a budget agreement. You know, families throughout Mississippi are cutting back on their spending because they've seen their income reduced. I think they have every reason to expect their government to do the exact same thing.
Well, actually, everybody's taking a cut, so it's not money being pulled from Peter to pay Paul. This is an instance where we just hadn't had the revenue, and I would much prefer seeing money in education rather than incarceration. However, we got to have both budgets, and so we just really need to start making some more quality and wiser decisions.
We're being forced to make some very tough decisions, and it's going to impact every aspect of government that we see. And so although we're coming together, no one really feels really good about this budget because we know that it's going to cause some pain and suffering, some adjustments. But like I said, this is the best we can do right now, but we should analyzing it, trying to see what we could do to shore up different areas of government.
It's a complete disaster. It is a self-inflicted wound. It is an unforced error. It is the worst public policy decision that I've seen down here in 25 years. These cuts are unnecessary, they're counterproductive, and when these cuts go into effect and we start having people furloughed and teachers and others not rehired, at the same time we've got well over $500 million sitting in cash, it's just a disaster.
Well, I'm still concerned about the funding of IHL and the funding of community junior college and K-12. But given how much money that is available, I'm pretty much satisfied and comfortable with it. I just hope that we can pass this budget, be out of here by Friday, and if we stay Saturday, that's too long.
Much to my surprise, I've been up here for 11 years, and this is the first time that in recent years that we have seen full cooperation between the House, the Senate, and the Republicans and the Democrats.
As you know, we generally give positions, Senate and House positions, prior to the budget negotiations taking place in conference, and you have to leave it up to the lead negotiators to come up with the final plan, and I think they've done that.
Budget negotiators have done what they could do with this horrible financial situation that we have. Board of Health, for example, is suffering severely, about a 7% cut. What you get into with these budgets that hurts more than anything are those budgets like the Board of Health, where the state only puts up about 9% of the total budget and the rest of it's federal and self-generated funds. We miss our opportunity by cutting general funds to match literally millions and millions of federal dollars, and that's where it's really going to hurt us.
That was House Public Health Chairman Steve Holland addressing the budget. Before him, we heard Senator Briggs Hobson, Representatives Hank Zuber and George Flaggs, Senators Hob Bryan and Hillman Frazier, Representative John Hines, and Senator Alan Nunnally. Also at the Capitol, the House Labor Chairman has finally released legislation designed to reauthorize the Department of Employment Security. Democratic Representative Rufus Straughter had threatened to hold that bill until the Senate agreed to pass a separate bill that would boost unemployment benefits. But Straughter told MPB today that he has released the Employment Security Reauthorization Bill from his committee. It now awaits Senate action. And at this point, we want to bring in MPB's Capitol reporter Carl Gibson. He's been monitoring the House and Senate all afternoon. Carl, what's the latest from there?
Well, Ron, as we speak, the Senate is still in session. They're debating several appropriations bills. They're about to wrap up for the day. The House had adjourned at 5. But several key things that they had passed over. You had mentioned the MDES reauthorization that did happen. Although I've just heard several minutes ago from a senator that the provision regarding $18 million in unemployment benefits from stimulus money will not be included in that deal. So as of right now, the agency will be reauthorized, but it doesn't look like that money will be coming in.
Okay, now, Carl, we know that some of these budget numbers may change as debate winds on, but what are some of the key differences that you're seeing now between the legislature's budget and the governor's budget recommendation?
Well, you had mentioned earlier in the program that the governor had made that recommendation just last Wednesday. In fact, the Joint Legislative Budgets Committee had agreed on revised revenue estimates from the Revenue Estimating Committee. So basically what that means is that $100 million had been scaled back from original estimations for the 2011 budget that begins on July 1st. So the governor's recommendation, a lot of lawmakers tell me in the House and Senate, came too late. And really it was the budgeting process was still between House and Senate conferees and the appropriations process. It was still mainly a legislative effort. So, again, the governor's recommendations were really not ultimately changing any budget picture for next year.
Okay, thank you, Carl. That's Carl Gibson reporting by phone after a busy day at the state capitol. Time now to introduce tonight's panelists on Quorum. Jere Nash is a well-known Democratic consultant and newspaper columnist. He co-authored the books Mississippi Politics and Mississippi Fried Politics with Andy Taggart. Brian Perry is a partner in the Capstone Public Affairs consulting firm, and he writes a widely read column on political affairs for the Madison County Journal. And Dr. Marty Wiseman is here. He's the director of the Stennis Institute of Government at Mississippi State University. Gentlemen, welcome to Quorum. We also want to hear from our viewers out there and our listeners tonight. Our toll-free line is open right now. Call 1-877-405-5247 with your questions for our panel. The number again, 1-877-405-5247. And you can also email your questions to Quorum at mpbonline.org. You can also join the discussion on Twitter. Well, Dr. Wiseman, let me toss the first question to you. Last year's legislature went right up to the June 30th deadline for approving the 2010 budget, but this year they could have it all wrapped up by this Friday, the 23rd of April. Are you surprised by this development?
Well, given the experience last year, remember that was an exercise in brinksmanship, and when the legislature left without a budget, then they threw the ball to Governor Haley Barbour's court, and he had the timing on his side. Plus, he could specify what was dealt with and use time as a pressure. I think that the legislature got together and figured out a mechanism to keep control of the budget process as much as possible, and then had that 3.5-week break, and then came back after using that time for budget negotiators to craft a budget, and I think it worked to keep things under the legislature's control.
Okay, is anybody else surprised that we had a legislative session that's wrapping up pretty much on time, even though with a 3-week break?
My sense is that no one wanted to relive what happened last year, and that they were going to do pretty much what they needed to do in order to avoid that. I don't know whether you've heard anything else.
Well, I think we also benefited from the fact that many of the battles that were fought last year were impacted multi-years. It wasn't just over last year, but it in fact affected this year's budget, next year's budget as well. And so some of the big issues were already handled.
Perhaps one of the things that went through legislators' mind as well is when you're talking about a shrinking budget, to spend money on overtime and to pay more for the legislative session was necessary might have been a cause for some kind of criticism as well.
I think the other thing that helped was that the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee is running for Congress. And he'd much rather be up in the north part of the state running for Congress than down here hassling over a budget.
Several reasons, I'm sure. One of the things that alarmed some lawmakers this week was a report on the public employees' retirement system. That several key lawmakers warned that PERS will need an additional $90 million to support pension costs for state retirees. We raised the issue with lawmakers, including Senator Tommy Galat from Biloxi.
I don't believe we're going to have that much of a shortfall as far as the retirement plan. And if we do, then what will happen is we'll come back in session, we'll put more monies than that, with us contributing toward that. The public employees that are presently employed will be contributing a little bit more monies into the system so we can build the system back to what it should be.
I think we're in the process of working it out. We first want to see what the revenues look like. We also want to see how much available dollars is left out of the FMAC. But I'm confident with the governor and the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor leadership, we would address the PERS shortfall.
That's Vicksburg Representative George Flaggs raising yet another issue, FMAP, and that stands for Federal Medical Assistance Percentages. It's the formula by which federal officials determine aid to state governments for funding Medicaid. Congress temporarily enhanced the FMAP as part of the 2009 stimulus effort. If they extend the enhanced match, then Mississippi would receive another $187 million to help make ends meet. The U.S. House and Senate are considering the FMAP enhancement in separate bits of legislation, but the extension is far from certain. We tried to reach members of Mississippi's congressional delegation about the federal match, and Republican Congressman Greg Harper expressed this concern. Quote, "While the legislation extends several programs that are important for Mississippi, I will not support a bill that will add to the already exploding national debt." So back to our panel. First, is this FMAP delay yet another sign that Mississippi has become too dependent on the federal government for budget aid? Jere Nash, why don't you take a crack at that one first?
Well, the easy answer to that is yes. Mississippi needs as much help as we can get. My sense is that as we move past the stimulus part of President Obama's agenda, and part, as Haley Barbour said, we're going to start losing some of that money. The pressure is really going to be on Congress to try and mitigate that, to make it easy on the states to wean states off of that, I think, for a period longer than just 1 or 2 years. And this FMAP battle is the first, I think, in a long series of battles that all states are going to fight to try and keep getting some of that money.
Brian Perry, you agree?
Well, I think that one of the concerns that I would expect Congressman Harper and a lot of the Republicans have is what comes next in the Medicaid funding. When you look at the health care provision passed by the Democrats in Congress, and one of the big problems that Governor Barbour has with the legislation is the incredible burden it's going to put on Mississippi's Medicaid. And the FMAP is just going to be a drop in the bucket compared to that.
Dr. Wiseman?
Well, I agree, and the Obamacare, as they call it, health plan, has got unknown impacts as far as Medicare and Medicaid is concerned, and but that's something everybody in the country is going to have to be prepared to deal with. And Mississippi had, 600,000 people who lacked coverage, and there's some responsibilities there. So
it's difficult for me to let Brian pass when he says the burden on Mississippi, that they're worried about the burden on Mississippi, whereas this legislation can really help a lot of Mississippians. And I think that there's always a flip side to a political coin, and the Republicans may talk about the burden on Mississippi, but the flip side of that is this legislation is really going to help a lot of real Mississippians, and I think that's worth talking about as well.
Okay, and Brian, are you okay with that?
Well, I think that
of course there's
a lot of there's a lot of ways we can help Mississippians without increasing taxes and putting the burden on small businesses and people that have their own families to take care of, and that's what the whole debate is about, I believe.
Okay, and what about the PERS situation? Where do we think that's going to play out politically?
Good grief.
Dr. Wiseman?
Well, Mississippi joins virtually all other states in their problems that they're facing with their public employee pension systems, and the numbers can be startling when you look at unfunded liabilities heading out a number of years, but Mississippi has been fairly conservative in how they've handled it, and compared to California and other states percentage-wise, ours is in much better shape than...
well, everybody's in better shape than California, right?
Well, that's right.
I mean, they're facing a lot of trouble.
We're in this fix because of the decline in the stock market, and if the stock market rebounds, then I don't think you'll hear this problem again.
Mm-hmm. So we're dependent on the stock market
once again. Well, I think they do a pretty good job. I think our losses have been a lot less than a lot of other states, but they invest a significant share of the principal in the market.
Okay.
But we're also in this fix because of a built-in cost of living compounded yearly that was passed in the 1990s, and that's not tied to inflation. And so when you have growth, or when you have slow growth or negative growth, which is what a recession is, the payments still increase. And so we've got less money coming in, more money going out, and so there needs to be some reform to that system as well.
Okay. Any suggestions?
Yeah, there's some innovative ways. You could look at buyouts, give people incentives to take a retirement earlier at a lower amount. I'm not an expert on PERS, but I've heard some innovative ideas.
Okay.
Are you advocating doing away with the cost of living?
I think it should be adjusted in a different way than just a standard cost of living 3% per year, regardless of what the economy is doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you'll find great difference of opinion on whether Mississippi is on the brink of a solid economic recovery. Remember, 19 straight months of revenue shortfalls have led us to the budget crisis that we face right now. But March revenue broke that streak. Many legislative Democrats believe that it is a sign of better times ahead, so they're a lot more eager to toss in more reserve funding for the 2011 budget. The governor, well, he is not nearly as eager.
The March revenue increase was almost totally driven by corporate income tax receipts. The most volatile, and the members of the Revenue Estimate Committee will tell you, the most difficult to estimate, particularly on a month-by-month basis. The only other increase in there was gaming. Sales tax was down, not just down under the estimate, but down under last year. Individual income tax was down. Well, those two together, the use tax were down. Those together equal 70-something% of our revenue. And until we see an upturn there that continues for 2 or 3 months, then I'm going to continue to be very conservative. But I hope that March is going to be the first month of something positive happening on revenue, but I am not going to change my conduct of being prudent and conservative till I see several more things to boost that opinion.
There's no reason to do this budget in the last week of of April, as opposed to waiting into May and get one more month of collections and see what happens. And there's certainly no reason, if Congress is going to send us $187 million in money that was not anticipated earlier on, why would we stop at $110 million and not at least spend most of the $187 million that's coming from the Congress for the purpose of shoring up this year's budget? The insistence on making this year's budget as bad as it can possibly be is just unconscionable. It's incomprehensible.
That's Senator Hob Bryan raising his objections to the governor's TAC. Brian Perry, there's a lot of optimism expressed, especially among Democrats, about the state's revenue finally turning around this year. Is that just wishful thinking, do you think?
Well, I hope they're right. I hope the economy has turned around and we're going to see increased revenue and see increased revenue to citizens and individuals as well. I hope that everyone's making money and getting their jobs. But we took several months before of negative revenue before we made any cuts. I think it's going to take several months before we know whether or not we can increase spending. And if you ask most Mississippians, I don't think their top priority is, oh, the economy's doing better, let's go increase government spending. That's not what they're looking for. Another problem with optimism is we've heard it the past 2 years, and every year they say, well, let's spend all the money now, and next year we won't. The economy will improve and we won't need to make these cuts. And if we'd listened to him either the past 2 years, we wouldn't have a budget last year or this year or next year.
Is he right to be so cautious, Jerry?
Well, he's wrong to say that the Democrats wanted to spend every dime that we had. They obviously wanted to spend more than what was spent, but I don't think any Democrat was advocating spending all the way down to the bottom of the barrel. But I'd much rather be optimistic than cautious, and I agree completely with Hob Bryan. There's no excuse for not spending more of the rainy day money that we have to shore up education, higher education, elementary, secondary education, take advantage of these matches with Medicaid and public health. I agree with Hob Bryan. It is unbelievable that we're sitting on $500 million of cash and we're not willing to spend $50 or $60 million of it to shore up these funds. I just don't get that.
Because the rainy day fund is for rainy days, and it's when you need it? I mean, is that...
That's the way I see it.
Okay, so you are not in agreement there,
well,
Dr. Wiseman.
Over the past couple of weeks, I've heard analysis about their state from Governor Ed Rendell of Pennsylvania, the governor of Ohio, and both talked about the recession, their 12% unemployment in their states, and said the one way that we're going to count on to come back is education. Well, Mississippi was last in education funding before all of this began, and it's so bad now with the cuts we've seen and then this budget that we're losing contact with number 49. And that's one thing that scares me, is we are cutting our seed corn and throwing it away in an already bad education picture, and I think Hob Bryan has alluded to that on a number of occasions.
Okay, well, we're going to go to our calls right now. We're accepting your telephone calls. Our first one is from Irene. Irene, what is your question for the panel tonight?
Yes, I have a question for the government about Medicaid, where he's cutting out a whole lot of funds for disabled people that need like blue pads. My son got shot when he was 17 years old. Now he's 29. And since he's been 21 years old, they cut off all his funds except for SSI and Medicaid. And he needs blue pads and medicine and cannot even get it because Medicaid won't assist him. And
okay.
he has to pay for his blue pads every month.
Okay.
Every month.
Is anyone familiar with the blue pass?
The blue pad that he used, he got shot in the head. And when he eat it, he drills out his mouth. He eat that pureed food, and it he has to use that blue pad to keep from getting wet.
Okay. And the cuts are affecting him across the board, you say, Irene?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's Irene wondering about more Medicaid cuts, obviously affecting her in a very personal way. But as I understood it, the governor was increasing Medicaid funding for this year in his budget.
Well, I think that what she points out is what's real important about making priorities in our budget. When you hear about things like that, you wonder, why are we spending money on some of the things that we do spend money on when there's more important things to address? Some farmers might disagree with me, but when we're spending money on an egg marketing board, when we're talking about laying off teachers, should one get funded and one not? Well, that's what the debate's about. But we really should set priorities in making our decisions.
Our largest budget item is Medicaid, is it not? And as I understood it, the governor is increasing Medicaid funding by, or suggesting Medicaid funding increase by 10% in the face of all these cuts.
Well, and one of the issues related to Medicare and Medicaid funding is there's a federal match. It's what, 4 to 1?
Right. 6 to 1.
6 to 1, and so when you cut the state money, you are cutting $6 more for every dollar that you cut. So it's almost foolhardy to do that, and so but it's a monster that can gobble up a lot of dollars, and we better find a way to deal with it.
Okay. Well, the Governor's Commission on Educational Structure held another meeting on Monday. The panel is considering how to cut the number of school districts across Mississippi. An independent research group presented a list of 18 districts that would be prime candidates for merging into other districts. Most of them are in the Mississippi Delta. The researchers chose them on the basis of faltering academic standards and inefficient administrative expenses. They project a cost savings of $12 to $14 million a year. If the state follows their recommendations, that's quite a bit less than expected. The commission has not issued a formal proposal, and it may be 2011 before lawmakers consider such a move. Still, this is an issue that draws a lot of interest. Dr. Wiseman, how divisive an issue would or could this become for our state leaders?
It's hugely divisive, and I have an idea that that's one of the reasons why Governor Barbour is hesitant to call a special session to deal with it, because even in the limited recommendations that were made on Monday, those school districts have spoken out, and there's got to be a lot of concern about the logic of those recommendations. Many of them taking two failing districts that not only were failing academically but financially and putting them together, and that doesn't seem like a good formula for consolidation. It seems like you just expand a bad thing that way. But I think it's an issue that's got to be looked at, but I think the report that came out Monday falls a little short of certainly generating the good stuff to really take a look at how to do this.
Jere, who has the most to gain or lose politically from this consolidation effort, do you think?
Well, anybody who pushes it has everything to lose, and people who oppose it have everything to gain politically. This is really one of the most bogus issues that has ever come in front of the state legislature.
Bogus how?
Bogus in the sense that it won't save hardly any money. It disrupts what is a reasonable educational system in these small communities. All of these are rural districts that they're talking about consolidating, except for, I see they're going to consolidate Octavia Hall County and Starkville, but that's the only sort of urban district, if you will, although outside of Starkville, Octavia Hall County is rural, but there is nothing to be gained by just sort of doing away with one or two administrative positions. And what's going to happen?
That's not a cost saving at all, in your opinion?
No, because what's going to happen is they're going to spend that money overseeing these kids who are now sort of have one superintendent overseeing. Now they're going to have an associate superintendent to oversee those schools. And you're going to spend more money on transporting kids to different schools that is further away from their homes as opposed to closer to their homes right now. There's just very little savings to be made at a huge disruption. And you're talking, what gets me is we have these Republicans who are pushing consolidation and taking sort of the administration of schools further away from the parents. when they ought to be trying to make the administration of the schools closer to the parents so that it's easier for them to hold them accountable. It is just completely and totally bogus, and this report that just was issued admitted that there weren't going to be any state dollar savings in this thing.
Okay, let's let Brian Perry respond to some of this. Is this a bogus issue, and will there be savings and significant savings to justify it?
I don't know that you can say if across the state consolidation is going to save money and be better for schools, or it's not. I think there are some specific districts that it could help. But you also have to look at, is the priority to improve education, or is the priority to cut costs? And one doesn't necessarily mean the other. You can combine two failing districts, cut out a superintendent, and have one failing district that you're paying less for. That's a good thing, but it still doesn't address the major problem, which is it's still a failing district.
Those of us on the Democratic side of the aisle hope and pray that Republicans push this issue from the governor all the way down. We're hoping that this is one of their signature issues because it is just a great political wedge issue. It may be the only political wedge issue we Democrats have to put up in campaigns.
So you're hoping for it. You're hoping that
I hope they push it, man.
It's easy to.
No waters can be more treacherous than school consolidation, and that I've watched it happen in several states. And the animosity that develops and the loss of little rural school districts that are the focal point of communities, and
even if it is cost sufficient to consolidate, there's still going to be
the
political hay to
reports
pay.
where the numbers crunched and the coefficients mean nothing when you talk about a community losing its rural community losing its school, losing the
so it's
point
okay
of
for
pride.
everybody else's schools, but not mine.
Right. It is
a
a no-win situation politically.
Okay. We have a phone call. Marvin from Moorhead has a question for the panel. Marvin, go right ahead.
Yes, I was wondering if we're going to keep cutting educational costs, how are we going to attract businesses? And we already ranked one of the lowest in the nation as far as education is concerned. If we keep cutting the costs, how are we going to make it better so that we attract more business?
Okay, and Marvin's point is that you're going to be affecting, cutting education, you're going to be affecting the workforce, and workforce is something that the governor keeps pointing to as we have a good workforce, it's going to attract better business. Marvin's point is the opposite of that, saying that if you cut education, you're going to be affecting the workforce and make us less attractive to outside business.
What quality of life begins with education? If you're talking about getting outside people to look at coming to Mississippi, very difficult to say that, we got the cheapest education and may be the worst education, but there's so much we had to do in education anyway, and I understand the argument that you can't just throw money at it, but it takes money to do that too. And as I said, you got so many governors around saying we're going to educate our way out of this recession, and we are going to have a lot of ground to make up. Just as Marvin said, he had a very good point.
Yeah, there are a lot of arguments against cutting education, but education has been cut because it's one of the biggest budget items. It was inevitable to cut somewhere at some point in some time.
You could use rainy day funds to avoid those cuts. The Republicans just weren't willing to do it.
Well, and you're also going to see that education is not going to be cut. The percentage, what you did is passed it down to the local level, and there are going to be districts that can afford to grit their teeth and make that up, and the good districts will do that, but those districts that were already suffering won't have the wherewithal to make up that difference.
And I heard Hub Bryan speaking on the Senate floor today talking about how some of these districts have made up some of these costs, and they've cut out transportation for teacher development, and they've cut out field trips. And my mother's a public school teacher, and I went to public schools, and I believe in teacher development and I believe in field trips, but you can make cuts without cutting teachers. And we were talking about local control of the schools before. If you're going to make the decision to fire a teacher, that's a local decision. The state isn't saying fire a teacher. They're saying find the cuts, and the local school board can make the decision on how to do that, or the local superintendent.
But as you know, some local districts are actually raising local property taxes to offset some of these cuts.
Again, local decision.
It's a local decision, but it's certainly not. They're not saving money. Instead of paying a higher sales tax, they're paying a higher property tax.
Mm-hmm. Well, the national recession is what led Mississippi to this 2010 budget crisis. We've said it before, as unemployment numbers drop, so do state revenues. So what can state leaders do to bolster job growth? We put the question to Governor Barbour.
The biggest thing we need, Mississippi, is we need our small businesses to start coming back. The stimulus package that the administration did was great for state government. We got a couple of $1 billion, more than $1 billion, which ran through the state treasury, and it kept us where school teachers and state employees and in other states or at other times might have lost their jobs. But none of what they have done has helped Main Street. Small business is the backbone of our economy. They're still hurting. They're having a hard time getting credit. Their customers or the people who've been laid off, they're not affected by the gigantic amount of capital infusion that the Fed keeps pushing into the American economy. They're not affected by that at all. It doesn't get down to us because the big financial institutions are using the money to make money on their trading accounts. They're buying and selling assets rather than making loans to get down to Main Street. That's the biggest thing. Speaker and I agreed on a small business loan program, which has now been codified. We're going to look and see what the president's small business loan program is. He said he's going to have a $30 billion small business loan program. If that's true, that's about $300 million for Mississippi. That's a lot more money than we can put into a small business loan program. So hopefully that's going to happen and we can help use that money to help small businesses.
Well, it may surprise the governor's detractors to hear him speak eagerly about a White House jobs initiative. Brian Perry, does this reaffirm the view that government should play a strong role in helping the private sector create a strong economy?
Well, it certainly has a role. I mean, I think tax cuts is a role that government can play, and tax incentives. I think that lowering health care costs instead of raising them, like what has just happened, would help small businesses. I think a smart energy policy would help manufacturing and industry in the United States instead of forcing steel production and manufacturing overseas rather than cap and trade. So there are things that the government can do, and usually what the government can do is not do the bad things.
Mm-hmm. And Jere Nash, were you surprised to hear the governor's remarks that he seemed to be...
I don't know where to start with Brian's comments. I'm trying to sort of parse in my own mind. We only have limited time what to say. Brian, really, you don't think it helps small businesses to provide their employees with health care?
Not when you're forcing them to pay higher than they would in the private market.
Well, I mean, there's going to be a huge amount of subsidies available to help people afford the health care, don't you think? And
subsidies come from the taxes. And if you're just moving money around, it's not like money's being created. You're taking money from other people to make that subsidy. It's not free money.
Well,
the government doesn't create
it's
money.
It's the same as tax incentives. When we loaned Toyota or when we loaned Nissan millions of dollars, we were taking money out of one pot and putting it in another pot to create jobs.
No, a tax cut is not a loan. A tax incentive is not a loan. It's just a not receiving money. It's saying the government's not taking as much money, and I believe in that.
Okay. Well, there's a difference of opinion here, I kind of indicate. We have a call from Franklin County. This is Willie, who wants to get in on quorum and ask a question of the panel. Willie, go right ahead.
Instead of like cutting funds from the educational system, why can't they invest money into like renewable energies? Like because most schools are used at daytime, so when they use like renewable energies, they could sell the power back at night.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Willie from Franklin County wondering about why we are not investing in renewable energies. Dr. Wiseman?
Well, I'll have a general response to that, in that times like these are good times for innovation because we can look for any possible solution that could contribute, and if that is one, then somebody needs to be looking at that. It sounds like he's involved in that kind of industry and knows something about it.
Does that sound like a good idea to you, Jerry?
Marty, you know exactly the reason we're not doing renewable energy. Republicans don't like to do that kind of stuff, man. All they want to do is build new power plants. They're not into figuring out creative ways to conserve energy or do renewable energy. If we can't take it out of the ground, they ain't interested.
Well, you know, one of the renewable energies does come out of the ground, and that's wood. I mean, we grow trees and use wood materials. We've got other biofuels, and those are renewable. And I've heard Governor Barbour say many times that his energy policy is all of the above. That includes renewable, solar, wind, along with nuclear and coal and natural gas. I think the Republican energy policy is all of the above. And Mississippi's leading the way in renewable energy. We're doing a lot of work at Mississippi State, and we've got some biomass groups here in Mississippi that are doing some very innovative things where there can be renewable energy powered plants as well as dual plants that fire coal and renewable energy.
Okay, well, the Tea Party activists, that's a word we haven't used yet, and that's always a hot button issue. Tea Party activists rallied supporters and concerned citizens alike outside the Capitol last weekend. Several hundred people gathered to support the Tea Party's call for free markets, less taxes, and limited government. They marched from the state fairgrounds in Jackson all the way to the Capitol. Republican officials such as Lieutenant Governor Phil Bryant and Secretary of State Delbert Hosemann addressed the crowd. They rallied opposition to the nation's new health care reform law. Jere Nash, what are your views on the Tea Party movement in Mississippi? And keep them to the, I guess we have 15 minutes left in the show.
Well, I hate to keep using the same word over and over again, but I think bogus fits the Tea Party movement like it does school consolidation.
Why? These issues that they bring up?
If
limited
these
government?
same people had been protesting the trillions of dollars that George Bush sent this country into debt over, then I would think that they were legitimate. If they had been protesting the Part D Medicare program that George Bush ran through Congress without any funding, then I would think that they were legitimate. But none of that happened.
You don't think it's possible they just had enough after the bailouts and everything else that and the increased spending that maybe they just reached their limit?
Well, I guess after Bush drove us into a recession and after he spent trillions of dollars in debt and money that he didn't have, maybe you're right. I'm willing to see that it's possible.
Okay. Are Republicans confident, Brian, that they can count on election support from these Tea Party supporters who are out there waving signs and making speeches? Are they going to go Republican, or are they going to go to an independent party?
My impression from speaking to them is that they are not interested in forming a third party. We saw this with Ross Perot in the 90s, and we saw what happened when you've got a movement based around a leader like that. Ross Perot used all the followers and didn't accomplish much. Yeah, Jesse Ventura used the Reform Party in Minnesota and then leave it to success, but then to leave it. You saw Pat Buchanan hijack the Reform Party for his own purposes to little success, and it just sort of faded into irrelevance. But these people are not like that. These people have a movement. They don't have somebody that they're reporting to. And with all due respect, they did protest before when Bush was president. They protested in 2006 and 2008. They didn't show up. When you look at the losses that Republicans faced in 2006 and 2008 in the Congress and the Senate, they just said, we've had enough. And then finally they're saying, not only have we had enough, but we're going to go and do something about it. And they tend to be conservative people, and the Republican Party is the conservative party. And so they're making a difference within the party, within the primaries, and Republicans have very much said, you know, if a Tea Party guy comes in and gets elected, we're going to get behind him. And a lot of the Tea Party people I've spoken to say, look, if our guy doesn't win in the primary, we're with the Republican nominee, because they want to make a change in Washington.
Dr. Wiseman, is this movement having a strong impact on state politics here in Mississippi, as it is with, or it appears to have in national politics?
Well, it's very similar. There was a New York Times CBS News poll that came out on April 15th, and for the first time had a scientific look at the Tea Party and a profile. 89% white, 59% male, 75% over the age of 45, higher per capita income than the population as a whole, very conservative, and oddly, 52% said too much was made of black problems by politicians in Washington and elsewhere.
How much was that? How many was that?
52%. What all of that seems to boil down to say about the Tea Party movement is that they're pretty self-sufficient and not concerned about a lot of those who would be helped by government, so don't be taking any more of my dollars too.
Are they a lot different from the libertarians, or?
There's some similarities there, although the most Tea Party over the age of 65 don't want their Medicaid or Social Security messed with. But if you ask about Mississippi politics, if you look at the 1st District, I think there is going to be a definite Tea Party effect there. You've got 3 Republicans, including Senator Allen Nunley, running in a primary there. But you've got 5 independents, all of whom with an anti-big government bias, and 1 Constitutional Party member. So in the November general election, you're going to have 8 people, including Travis Childers, in there.
So it has the potential of playing.
He could win with a low plurality because of the vote being divided up amongst all those. And several of those are coming from the Tea Party factions.
Well, during Saturday's Tea Party rally, Secretary of State Hostman described the new ballot initiative. It's designed to block the new federal requirement to purchase health insurance. Initiative 32 would amend the state constitution and make participation in any health care system a right, not a mandate. It needs some 90,000 petition signatures to get on the 2011 ballot. Well, Representative Steve Palazzo of Biloxi was one of the 2 House Republican lawmakers to file Initiative 32 on Tuesday. And Palazzo told a reporter, quote, "I know we need health care reform. I just don't like the health care reform that's been forced on us. I don't think the federal government can force a person to purchase a product," end quote. It's still not clear what the practical impact of this initiative might be. After all, state law cannot supersede federal law in such matters. So, Brian Perry, what's your view on all this?
Well, I think that it's a very popular proposal in Mississippi. Stephen Palazzo and Alex Mansour are both going to get a lot of traction on it. Their idea is to get it on the ballot in time for next year's election, which means they have to collect the initiative petitions by mid to late October of this year. You ask how the Tea Party affects things. I can tell you without the Tea Party, I don't know that the voter ID initiative would have got enough signatures. They made the difference there. I think that a lot of Tea Party people made the difference in the Parenthood initiative. And if this gets on the ballot, it'll be because of the Tea Party. And when you've got people out there mobilized, volunteering their time to go across the state to collect signatures, they're also going to turn out and vote, and it's going to make a difference.
Okay, state law cannot supersede federal law in these matters. So is Initiative 32 amount to anything?
Exactly. I mean, you ought to tell the viewers that Palazzo is running for Congress, so this is going to help his congressional campaign. But more importantly,
so you think it's grandstanding?
It is a complete and total waste of anybody's time and energy, other than for a political organizing tool. It's going to have no legal impact. It's just like what Mississippians did when all the civil rights laws were passed by the federal government. They tried to stand in the schoolhouse door and prevent it from happening, and it's just not going to happen. It's a political deal. It's not a legal deal.
Okay. We're going to try to get as many calls as we can get in this final 9 minutes of the show. And right now, Barry from Tupelo is holding on, and he wants to ask a question of the panel. Barry, you go right ahead.
Gentlemen, would this be a time to consider a state lottery? Thank you very much.
Okay, short and sweet and to the point. Barry from Tupelo says, should we consider a state lottery? Dr.
Well, I
Wiseman?
think it's not a frivolous question by any means. One of the things that I've been concerned about as I've watched the budget situation unfold is there's been no mention whatever of revenue. Now, a general tax increase probably wouldn't be popular anywhere, but are there unusual measures that we hadn't considered yet? Now, lottery is a pretty big one, but I go back to the nuts and bolts of the salvation of Mississippi, which is going to be education. Should we try to find a way that we can dedicate some dollars and keep that from just completely falling through the trap door?
The state lottery sound like a good idea to you, Jerry?
Well, it's a fascinating question because So far, all of the casino interest in Mississippi have opposed it because they viewed it as eating into their profits, which would eat into the taxes that they pay into the state. Whether it would do that or not is yet to be seen. Whether it would generate significant more tax revenue, it is a voluntary tax, right?
It is voluntary.
So it's a fascinating deal. Whether it would get anywhere in the legislature remains to be seen. But I agree with Marty. It's certainly worth putting on the table for discussion.
Okay. Do you want to?
It's certainly voluntary, and it's very regressive. You see it across the country where it impacts the poorest people in the state the most. But I agree that it cannibalizes the gaming revenue that we're already seeing. You've got casinos in Tunica and Neshoba and on the coast.
So you think anything that would add would be subtracted from the gaming revenues?
It would subtract from the gaming, and the gaming, not only does it provide revenue through the gaming process, but also it brings in infrastructure and hotels and restaurants and golf courses. It does a lot more, and the lottery would just be taking money out of Mississippi, but just leaving a little bit behind that we probably would get most of anyway through the gaming.
Okay, we have a question from email. As far as forcing people to buy health insurance, this person wants to know what's the difference in forcing people to buy car insurance, for example?
Well, the car insurance that you buy is to protect other people. When I have mandatory car insurance, so if I wreck into somebody that they're taking care of, it's not to protect myself. That's not what's mandatory. The health care that they're pushing down from Washington, saying that I have to buy health care insurance or I'm going to be fined for failing to do so. And I do buy health insurance. There have been times in my life when I haven't. And I just think that it's a freedom that I should make my own decision on. And I should pay my own bills. And if I make a mistake and have to deal with it, then I will deal with it. I think it's wise to buy insurance. I just don't think it should be mandatory.
One of the ironies is that the mandatory purchase of health insurance is a poor substitute for either a single-payer system or a public option, both of which the Republicans were roundly opposed to, and this is one that keeps the private health insurance companies in the game, and that was a compromise to avoid a single-payer system or a government option, and so yet it's been thrown back at the authors of it.
Okay.
I know you're running out of time, but
yes.
We just need to clarify. The federal government is not mandating that you buy health insurance. The federal government is saying if you do not buy health insurance and contribute to the betterment of the whole, you're going to be assessed higher. So that when you do go use the emergency room as an uninsured person, and all of us sitting around the table, plus all other Mississippians, contribute to your care, that you paid a little bit for it.
Okay, so it's a misnomer to say that there...
Of course it's a misnomer. It's an anti-mooching law is what it is. I can't believe Republicans are opposing an anti-mooching law.
Okay, we have a...
If I went to the emergency room, I'd rather pay for it myself.
But there are a lot of people, Brian, who can't pay for it themselves. That's what uninsured care is all about.
Would you want a case of leukemia treated at the emergency room?
Can you treat leukemia at emergency room?
That's my question.
I don't think that you can. But let's get another caller in here, gentlemen. This is Jim from Hinds County who has a question. We just have a few minutes left, Jim.
Yes, I wondered if there's any support in Mississippi for the use of health information technology to reduce medical costs and to reform health care delivery in our state, or do you know anything about that at all?
I'm not familiar. Health information technology?
There's a huge push by a number of organizations for both electronic health records and telemedicine. Okay. Using electronic health records to save enormous amounts of money, taking paper out of the system, making it easier for doctors to move patients. In telemedicine, instead of people having to spend money to drive somewhere to see a doctor, you use the internet, and you use fancy technology to sort of take the doctor to the person in a rural area. And there are a lot of people doing that, and it was a big part of the stimulus bill.
Yeah, Republicans and Democrats in Washington have both been pushing that, and it's been particularly helpful for states like Mississippi to look for that for a lot of our rural care.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I guess the final question is that if you believe whether the governor's spotlight in the national media has been a distraction to his work here on state affairs. Brian?
I think it's distracted a lot of the Democrats, but I don't think it's distracted him at all.
Jerry likes that answer. Do you think it's been a distraction, though?
Look, we are 2011. We are hoping and praying that Haley Barbour is running around in Iowa in 2011 instead of messing around the elections here.
You want to see it. Do you think it's been a distraction, Dr. Wiseman?
I wouldn't necessarily classify it as a distraction, although I think that Haley Barbour is going to be, for the next 18 months or so, probably the most prominent Republican in the country. A lot of it may be in the background, but he has certainly got a handle on 37 races for governor's mansions between now and 2012, and seems eager to get at it. So.
Okay. Well, what about the governor's handling of the budget crisis? How would you grade him?
A.
An A, right up there in the front. Jerry?
I'll give him a C.
A C. And Dr. Wiseman?
He's still got to sign this year's budget.
He's paying yours.
That's right. I think he has not dodged the responsibility, although I wish that education had been more off limits as far as the cuts were concerned. So I don't know. I'll give him pass.
Pass, okay. A special session. Does anybody see a special session coming?
Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about all the unemployment insurance stuff.
So you think maybe?
Whether that and school consolidation, either one of those could force a special session.
Okay, so it's still possible, it's still out there.
It's still a maybe.
Okay, still a maybe. All right. Well, you are watching Quorum on MPB television and mpbonline.org. We want to thank our listeners on MPB Think Radio. We'll talk with Representative Steve Holland and Rita Martinson next week, and Senators David Jordan and Doug Davis about the 2010 legislative session. So our thanks to tonight's panelists and to you, of course, for joining in on the discussion. This edition of Quorum will be available for viewing online tomorrow at mpbonline.org. Quorum returns next month for continued coverage of Legislature 2010. Until then, monitor PBS Think Radio and MPB Online for news and analysis on the stories that you care about. Thank you.